Targa has become very famous over the years as one of the world's premier go-to brands for serious offshore pilot house cruisers. But it's become equally famous for the fact that its fleet really doesn't tend to change that much. So when it releases a new boat, that is seriously big news. We're really grateful then to the guys down here in Poole at Wessex Marine for giving us the chance to take this absolute beast of a boat out on the water to see exactly how she performs. Now, I know I always do this, but before we take a drive, we've got to have a look at this helm position, because here on this new Targa 41, it could hardly be any better. Now, for a start, there's the sheer scale of this place, particularly given that this is a flybridge cruiser. We've got a fly deck up top. The scale here is tremendous. We've got triple sunroofs directly above us. But look, I'm a 6-footer. In order to reach these manual handles, I basically have to stretch. There's that much headroom. That reverse screen, very traditional for Targa and various offshore pilot house cruisers. Well, again, that generates plenty of space, and the visibility all round is fantastic, particularly as we also have, in classical Targa fashion, a big skipper's side door, but in this case, bigger than we've ever seen before. The aperture there is fantastic, and when you couple that with the fact that we also have a first for Targa in the form of side gates to access the pontoon, well, that really is a very practical touch. And then there's the dash itself. Now, for me, the compass is slightly oddly positioned over there in the centre. I prefer that up here directly in front of you so you can properly see it, and certainly Targa can do that for you. But what we have here on the test boat is a couple of 16-inch plotters, and we also have a handy little remote down to the side of the seat here so you can operate it from your chair. Plenty of switch gear there, a couple of cup holders, and we also have this adjustable barrel section. So the wheel, the thrusters, you'll see we've got stern and bow thrusters here, and the throttles, they all come back towards you. And then of course you can adjust the wheel as well independently, really make it just right for your position. And here we've got an impact mitigation seat. That's optional, but that slides forward aft as well. So whatever body shape you are, you can get yourself super comfortable here at the helm of the Targa 41. So let's just sort it out for my own body shape, and we'll get up and underway. This new Targa 41, it comes with a couple of engine options. You can have D6 480s on IPS drives, or you can have what we have here. We've got stern drives and a pair of D6 440s. And the first thing you notice as you get up and underway, and this is something you see with a lot of Targas, is there's just no bow lift. I'm looking behind me, I'm waiting for the horizon to disappear. I'm waiting for the nose to lift and for the visibility to rein itself in a bit. It never happens. All the way through, what are we doing now? 10, 12, 18, 20 knots. Still as flat as you'd like. And I haven't done anything with the tabs, I haven't done anything with the leg angles. So as we're cruising along here, we'll find a couple of little bits of chop, and you'll see we've got splashes coming off the forward part of the hull, but it's such an easy job here for me simply to elevate those legs and watch that line, that water line disappear aft, and the ride quieten down a bit. It's very easy to do, and I'm really pleased with that, because I remember testing the Targa 27.2, which is a fantastic kind of boat in all sorts of ways, but I did find that drove resolutely bow down, and I couldn't quite elevate it as much as I wanted. Here you've got all kinds of control, and in spite of the fact that this is a big, well-built offshore boat, a proper substantial platform, it feels like a boat you could control very easily from the helm. So let's have a go at that right now and chuck her about a little bit. We'll get up to speed. We're doing 26 knots here. I'll trim her in a touch. Still no need to touch those tabs, and I've got those on manual, and we'll swing around to starboard first. And honestly, look at that heel Look at that heel retention. Hands off the wheel and throttle, and it sits steady as you like, retains its pace. Still doing 30 knots. We've lost about half a knot there. It's absolutely lovely. And then back on the straight, a little bit more trim just to lift that bow. And the fact that that bow is so controllable suggests to me that this would be a really very effective following sea boat. Very stable, very dependable, very reliable. What I really like here, as I've just kind of illustrated already, is the fact that you kind of get the best of both worlds with this boat. If you want to go a little bit of chop there we are. If you want to go on a long passage, you can set it very much like you'd set maybe the Sargo 45 and enjoy a comfortable passage at all sorts of paces, whether you want to go 10 knots, 15 knots, 20 knots, 25 knots, it's all very comfortable. But if you want to step it up a bit and have a bit of a play, well look, you've got plenty of responsiveness, lovely handling, it's very reassuring, and you really can treat it like a much smaller boat, and that's a rare and beautiful thing, I have to say. In all honesty though, most people who buy this boat are going to want to do long, exposed offshore passages, because that's essentially what it's built for. So refinement, comfort and running efficiency are all pretty critical. And in terms of running efficiency, well, it's pretty good news. You run at 20 knots, you're seeing around about 3.5 litres per nautical mile disappearing from your tank. Well, we've got a 1,500 litre tank, or two 750 litre tanks, so 1,200 litres of usable volume. So that's going to give you a range of about 340 miles, which is very decent. Now that remains pretty much the same all the way up to 28 knots. It's only when you push on to about 32 knots that it pushes on to around about 4 litres per nautical mile. So your range dips to about 300. But even at the very top end of 38 knots, it's still just 5 litres per nautical mile. So you've still got a range approaching 250 miles, which is very decent. If you want to extend that, of course, you can just go more slowly because, as I say, the natural trim of this boat enables you to do that. You can go at 10 knots, you can go at 6 knots, you can go at 15, you can go at 20, whatever suits your day out, or the passengers on board, or the conditions you're facing. But then there is potential here, the guys at Targa tell me, to increase the capacity by 200 or 300 litres with an additional tank back there in the engine bay. But really, if you're getting that kind of range with the standard tanks, then there's not a great deal of point in just adding another 200 or 300 kilos just to eke out a few more miles. And before I forget, one other trait I want to mention about this boat is that even if you've got that nose pegged and you're going through a few swells with this skipper's side door open, well, this bow is fantastic. It looks like there's a fairly substantial bow flare, but I've seen that before and still had water ingress straight through the skipper's door. Well, absolutely not so here. It flings that water so aggressively, so well wide, there's absolutely no prospect of you getting wet here at the helm. In any case, this boat isn't just about the main helm, there's a flybridge up top. So let's go up there right now and see what that's all about. Now, first things first, access to this fly is really safe and secure. I like that a lot. When you get up here, I also like the fact that the helm position is very sociable. We've got a nice wraparound C-shaped starboard dinette with a fold-over backrest, so you can actually be kept company. It's a single helm position with a bolster, so again you can adjust it as you choose. Adjustable wheel as well. We'll start off in the sitting position though and have a little play up here. There we are. I've got to say, the fact that we're relatively close to this wind deflector, it improves the level of protection you actually get from it. It's a relatively compact flybridge. That's how we managed to get 3 sunroofs for that lower helm. It's set a decent way back, and actually it doesn't go all the way back to the aft end of the cockpit. You need an additional canvas sunshade to protect you down there. So it's quite a compact flybridge, but it's quite charming at the same time. As I say, very sociable, pretty well protected. And although we don't get a pair of plotters, we still get a proper 16-inch plotter up here. And it's nicely angled, so there's not too much glare. Great views all round. And as we stick her through a couple of turns, well, on some boats, when you're nipping over your own wake and there's a few bounces, you can kind of feel a degree of flex when you just elevate it up there on the flybridge, but no such thing here at all. Absolutely rock solid, precisely as you would expect from Targa. And to be honest, being up here in the wind and the chill, well, it doesn't detract at all from the fact that this is a boat I want to play on. We're back at Saltons Marina now, but before we jump on board and look at the internals, I just want to check out a couple of these details, and we'll start right here at the bow, because we intimated it when we were on board the boat, how dry this boat is, how aggressively it kicks that water sideways, more effectively, I would say, than any other boat I've tried. And this is the reason. I mean, look at that for a prodigious bow flare. It's so pronounced. And it's assisted as well by this huge fat rubbing strake. That's slightly undercut, so that flings a bit of the water downwards and sideways as well. Super effective stuff from Targa. And as we move back, well, this is a first for Targa. And most of the market would look at that and say, well, it's just a hull window, but actually it's the first proper hull window Targa has ever introduced on one of its boats. Usually it's just fairly traditional port lights, but this is a genuine proper hull window, and it makes a difference when you get down below. Further aft, we've got this. We mentioned these two, the side gates, positioned a decent way aft, but very useful for accessing that cockpit. And this again is a first for Targa. Again, probably not that revolutionary for the rest of the market, but big news for a company that's relatively conservative like Targa. We'll talk about the new stuff again in a moment as we go through the boat, but for the moment, what I want to talk about is the practicalities of this boat, because Targa's famous for making very practical, very user-friendly cruising boats. And you see that all over this platform. Now we've got a big fixed aft swim platform with a little ladder on the port side. We've also got this, very simple, but so welcome. Now, I spent about 5 years living on the inland waterways, and I was constantly down the weed hatch, clearing shopping bags and weed and all sorts of other detritus off my prop with a knife. Now, you don't get as much of a problem when you're boating coastal, but this is great. It gives you superb access down here to the two props. And it means that if you foul one of your props with a line, you don't actually have to don your wetsuit and jump overboard to sort it out. And the good news continues back here in terms of the practicality. Here we've got triple fender holders. We've got the same on the other side, so you can stow them properly where they belong, out of the way of the cockpit occupants. And the same goes for the outlet for the black water tank. It's a really good spot to put it there. Moving up into the cockpit itself, well, we've got nice big gates here, so it's super secure. And of course we expect that from a boat like this. We expect that from pretty much any boat in this sector. They're all secure, they're all very safe, but this is something a little bit special, because most offshore pilot house cruisers are just a bit drab, a bit uninspiring in terms of their alfresco spaces. Generally what you get is a fixed bench and lots of space to stand and pretty much nothing else, but here is pretty much the antithesis to that. As you can see, we've got a nice L-shaped seating unit on the starboard side, mirrored by another one on the port side. And then we've got additional seating up against the back end of that pilot house, including a little seat built in to the bottom end of the steps to access the flybridge. So that in itself is really sociable, but it gets better. Now you can fix a table in here. You can have two tables if you prefer. You can also have a couple of flip-up chairs here, so you can create an unbroken C shape right around the back end and seat up to, I'd say, maybe 12 people very comfortably. And you can even sink the table into the space, use infills and create an all-over sunbed while still keeping this companionway wide open. And that's critical to Targa. They want you to be able to navigate this boat very easily. And that's impressive. But like I say, it's the recreational versatility of this that's really impressive, because to my mind, there's no other boat in this sector of the market that does this as effectively. As with the helmet experience though, it's the way that the fun elements and the practical elements coexist that really pleases me. So for instance, yeah, we've got great use of space here, ramp up the sociable seating by using this step at the base of the flybridge steps. Good stuff, but some people are going to struggle to get up onto that bottom step because it's relatively elevated to function as a seat. So there's a little fold-up step just here to ease your passage up there. And the storage is fantastic too. We've got storage inside all the seat bases here. And if you want to free yourself of the main galley in terms of feeding drinks to your guests, well, you can spec these as enormous refrigerated lockers as well. So that's a lovely touch. And this is also something I'm really pleased by. Now, when I first jumped on board, I didn't really understand why this bench seat was just separated from the aft end of the pilot house by 6 or 8 inches. And the reason is there are 3 little rails here, 3 little hooks, and you hang your wet ropes on there, keep them out of harm's way, and they're ready to go when you get to your destination. But arguably the finest example of Targa practicality in this cockpit is to be found directly under my feet, and it's the access to the engine bays. Now, if I just open that up, it lifts in its entirety. Lovely strong rams, not difficult at all. And you don't just get the one hatch, you get the 2. Symmetrical, both sides. So you get proper access to both engines, proper access to all the necessary engineering points, all the necessary servicing points. And if I step down in here, well, I've also got these. That's the table that you can rig in the cockpit. That's beautifully stowed. If I step down into this space here, well, look, more storage there on the starboard side. Here are our 2 D6 440s. Obviously, with IPS drives, they'd be positioned further forward, but there's loads of space in here. We've got the domestic batteries on the port side there, the starter batteries here just inboard of those. Beautiful wiring at the front edge, as you'd expect from Targa. If I spin around, here's our calorifier. As I say, more storage there. If you want a generator, this boat doesn't possess one, then there's a great spot just aft of those domestic batteries on the port side. And if you want a seakeeper, well, again, that could be rigged in the centre here. Now let's continue our little tour of the alfresco spaces, because like I say, given the market segment, this boat really excels in that regard. We'll start with the port side deck, and the first thing, actually, is right here. Now, of course, we have another side gate on the port side, but just here, this is worth a little look. There's a good drained compartment here aft, and then ahead of that is your gas locker. Now, we saw when we were in the engine bay that there's no generator here, so we use a gas stove inside to preserve your electric power. But what's remarkable is the fact that the little base for that gas bottle is built from teak, and that really is a sign of things to come when we get inside the boat itself. In the meantime, we'll head further forward, because this is, of course, another element of this new boat that is particularly attractive. Now, when we were driving, we were talking about how wide the skipper's side door is. It's exactly as wide on the port side, really huge. And as luck would have it, we've got a Targa 32 sitting directly across from us here. So if you just have a little look across there, you'll see that the traditional width of the Targa door on both sides is about this. This is about 50 or 60% wider than that, and it makes a tremendous difference to the way the boat feels. It makes it much easier to navigate your way around. But let's continue up a couple of steps to the forepeak. Now, I call it a forepeak, but of course, as we've already seen, it's got an enormous flare, so it feels very beamy up here. Now, conventionally, you wouldn't expect much in the way of recreational versatility on the bow of a boat like this. And in truth, you don't get a tremendous amount, but looks can be a touch deceiving. So up here on this elevated central moulding, there's the option of cushions to turn this into a sunbed. You can also have a bimini if you choose to shelter from the sun. And there's also the option of a table just here if you like. Aside from that, of course, seamanship is very much catered for. We've got lovely big sturdy rails, and they've taken advantage of this big broad forepeak, because the boat we saw at the Düsseldorf Boat Show at the launch of this particular model, well, that had the anchor offset to starboard. You of course have to shift your cleats slightly sideways to enable that, but that means that you can use this as an authentic stepping off point, so you can nose into a beach, nose into a rock, step ashore and use a stern anchor in the Nordic fashion. So it's a very versatile space in its own right, this. Now, as I say, this particular boat has 2 fuel tanks rather than one. One of those tanks is relatively far forward. This is the filler for that. So that's very nicely positioned outboard of this fiberglass lip to prevent any slippery spillages on the deck. And as I work my way down, there's one other thing that's very much a first for Targa, and it's this. Now, conventionally, you'd expect a Targa to have relatively thick aluminium frames, and that minimises the size of the window, and it also kind of spoils the aesthetic. Well, this is the first inset flush fit window that Targa has used in its fleet, and not only does it uprate the aesthetic, but it enables them to use much larger windows, so it emits plenty more light and generates far better views from the saloon. But we still haven't finished with the alfresco spaces. So before we go inside, let's head up to the flybridge and see what that's got to offer. Now, as I say, this flybridge is not particularly big, but it's definitely a worthwhile feature in its own right. Now, we have a C-shaped dinette on the starboard side, and we have a lift-over backrest, so you can either face 3 people forward, or you can fold that forward, face it aft, and seat perhaps 5 or 6 people at this starboard dinette. It is a shame that the helm seat doesn't rotate to face across to them. And to be honest, given how sociable that aft cockpit is down below, you'd have expected them to factor that in. Nonetheless, it's good to see that the table that fits in here slots directly under this bench so that it's to hand whenever you need it. And better still, when you drop it into the gap and use an infill, this can be converted to create a third sunbed for this Targa 41. Now, the side decks on this boat are deep and generous and secure, but they're not particularly massive by the standards of the sector. So with its 13-foot beam, which is the same as the flagship 46, you get some really generous breadth in this pilot house, and it's very pleasantly arranged. Now, the first thing to note, of course, is the teak. We mentioned it when we were looking at the little teak plinth for the gas bottle. It is everywhere in here. See, I have to love teak because there are no options. You want oak, tough. You want Iroko, tough. You want mahogany, tough. Teak is what you get because that's what they've always used, and they enjoy using it. So everything in here you see is either teak face ply or solid teak, and it is beautifully, beautifully done in-house, and it shows. It's exquisite, I have to say. It feels beautifully built. It's a real treat. Now, one other thing to notice when you get in here, again, I hate to harp on about it, but the practicality. You come to your boat in the morning, enter through the back end. Here are your battery switches. Easy to reach, just where you want them. Here are some hooks to hang up your jackets and so on. Very practical indeed. And while you might not anticipate such a massive galley, you certainly get it. This galley is the same sort of size, height and breadth as the one on that flagship 46, and it's a really good feature. So you see how high it comes up to me, above my hip, really comfortable height for working on, even when you're at sea bouncing about a bit. And this again is full of really attractive features. For a start, loads of storage in here. Here's our gas cooker we talked about earlier. Of course, if you have a generator, an electric cooker is not a problem at all. This work surface throughout, solid Corian, really high quality. This is a nice touch too, check this out. A special little space for your own chopping board, tucks nicely away, and when you open the sink up, well, this lid is exactly the same shape, so you can pop that in there to keep that out of the way. And if you want neither in your way, oh, look at that. On it goes, nice and secure. In that goes, out of sight, out of mind, and you can get on with your cooking. Really impressive. Again, just very thoughtful. There's an extractor up above, and these are the windows I'm talking about. Unprecedented on a Targa, and it really transforms the experience. So easy just to look out, enjoy the view, see the horizon. And really, the galley is pretty fully featured too. An absolutely huge fridge down here in the centre, and a microwave built in there. Now you can swap that for an optional combi oven if you prefer, and down below the helm seat, well, there's a space here where you can spec a second fridge should you need it. But even in its base format, this is a really impressive galley. And directly across from that, of course, we have a dinette. Now, I like the fact that this dinette is raised. So if I sit up on here, I've just elevated that little bit so my views are fantastic all round. And of course, that does increase headroom down below, increases volume for the second cabin, a full beam cabin directly beneath me here, and we'll see that in a minute. But what else you might be surprised by here, well, you won't be surprised by is the fact this is a solid teak table, is the fact that we have this. You don't tend to see this on a Targa, a pop-out TV. And given it's their first attempt at such a thing, it's very well done indeed. Better positioned than most that you'll see, and it's actually built on a purpose-built teak plinth. Very impressive indeed, next to a little cabinet for bottles. Plenty more storage around there. If I pop that away, we'll move further forward and talk a little about the head height, about the headroom. Because as I said when I was at the helm, it was absolutely cavernous. I could barely reach the sunroofs. And that's fair enough forward. But what happens when you step aft, beneath that flybridge? Well, look at this. We've had Guy from Wessex Marine in here. He's 6'4", and there's still a couple of inches above his head. So this is a major success. Really impressive. Yeah, arguably you could say that the aesthetic of the Targa 41 is a little bit lofty. But what you get for that is fantastic, and it certainly, as we've seen, doesn't impact at all on the driving experience. Now I'm keen to get down and show you the two cabins, but before we do that, there's a couple of other details we absolutely have to look at in here before we leave the saloon. And the first one is this. Now, this is a lovely big deep drawer, and it contains 4 of these. These are the legs that you can connect to the bottom end of this table, drop it into the gap and create a double berth. Now when you think that you can fit 2 people sleeping forward, 3 in the full beam aft cabin, plus this, that's the potential to sleep 7 people on board this boat. And because of the openness of those companionways I've mentioned, the fact you've got the side doors here, the side gates aft, the patio doors aft, you can pretty much sleep all of those people without getting under each other's feet for a weekend. And then there's this. I like this a lot as well. This comes as standard. A nice bit of work in here and some bespoke glasses, each with their appropriate place. They don't rattle around at sea, and a bit more crockery and glasses down there as well. But to be honest, I mean, I've mentioned I love the way this boat is put together. The build is superb. It feels really classy. But this, gluing and screwing a joint, I'd want something a bit classier than that, because that's the sort of joint I would put together as an amateur DIYer. So I'd like to see that sort of detail just improved in terms of its calibre on a boat of this quality. That said, as we move forward, well, the reputation is restored. We've got this. This is quite a nice thing to see. You rarely see this on a modern boat, but this is a little tray for your charts, and there's plenty of space up here to spread those charts out and do the work you need to do. Plus some handy little bespoke storage spaces for your knickknacks, more under that co-pilot seat. And then access on the port side, as you'd expect, to what they call the owner's cabin. Now this bow cabin obviously occupies the tapering part of the hull, and you see that all over on the sides here and also at the head end of the bed. So they're using every spare inch to the very best of their ability. They've been clever, of course, because they've raised the bed to generate extra breadth, just a little bit more distanced from the most tapering part of the V. So there's good breadth to that bed. There's access on both sides as well, and because it's elevated, there's decent storage underneath. And again, storage is a major strength here. Now we've got these little units sitting directly up beneath the side decks to take best use of that otherwise redundant space there, plus additional ones down in here. And it's the same on both sides. We also have little cabinets here, plus a little hanging cabinet here. Now that's very shallow, perhaps about 7 inches, so it doesn't look that usable, but they've been quite clever because they've got the rail running from side to side rather than lengthways, so you can actually fit a good few shirts or jackets in there without too much of a squeeze. And then if we move round to the starboard side, well, we have a really decent ensuite heads compartment with a separate shower. Again, headroom is really quite impressive. An opening porthole there, a little mirror, a decent vanity unit, a little shower fitting here. And if I step into the shower itself, just inboard here, well again, really decent size. And this, I suspect, is the reason that Targa is calling this bow cabin the owner's cabin. But in all honesty, I think the true owner's cabin is the one aft, as we'll see right now. Now the really key differentiator here in this aft full beam cabin on the Targa 41 is this bulkhead. Now conventionally a Targa would tend to extend that bulkhead aft because it would contain the fuel tanks. Well, here we have a pair of fuel tanks, one beneath the deck aft and one beneath the deck forward. So they've been able to push this bulkhead way forward. And that in turn means that the smaller starboard bed is no longer like a teak-lined coffin. It's actually a proper place to sleep and really quite attractive in its own right. Now we've got access to that lovely big hull window there. I'll say lovely and big, it's relatively low profile, but it's at just the right height to give you good views from bed level, and there's lots of lovely natural light, and that's something that the nominal owner's cabin in the bow conspicuously lacks. And if you want to separate it off, well, we have a very simple privacy curtain there, and I reckon that's big enough potentially for a couple of adults, certainly a couple of kids. It's a very large single anyway. And over here on the port side, where the main bed is, well, that reduced deck head height that we see on the starboard side, that's mirrored here, and that looks like it could potentially be a problem, but it really isn't. When you snuggle yourself up at the bed head next to these reading lights, there's plenty of vertical room for you to prop yourself up and read a book. As I say, the views are pretty good. It's very pleasant indeed. We've got some nicely engineered shelving to the side here, and there's loads of storage everywhere. But of course, as I say, the reason that this cabin is deemed relatively compromised compared to the bow cabin is the fact that the ensuite heads compartment is relatively compact. Now that heads compartment is positioned halfway up the steps on the way to the cockpit, so it's in the ideal spot for use as a day heads. As we go towards it, it's just worth pointing out the access door for this cabin. It's on a runner, and it's also got a concertina hinge, so it makes really good use of space again. And although this is a very small footprint, again the headroom is remarkably good. That's got to be what, 6'7" perhaps. And what we have in here is everything you need and literally nothing you don't. We've got a little porthole, we've got some mirrors, we've got a bit of cabinetry again for some storage. We've got the toilet down here and a little vanity unit on the port side. And of course we've got a little shower fitting plus a runner built into the deck head, so you can run a curtain around here and keep the worst of the water off the various other bits and bobs. So it's limited as a wet room, but it's perfectly practical. And let's face it, if you really want a proper shower, then sleep in here and just head forward to use the one up at the bow. Now let's make no bones about it. We all know perfectly well that there's some fierce competition at this kind of size in the offshore pilot house market from the likes of Nordstar and Sargo. But with its ability to provide genuine recreational fun as well as tough offshore practicality, this boat has all the hallmarks of a genuine market leader and might arguably be the most appealing targa we've ever tested.